What's up, JVOX? I hope you can hear me. I think my mic's all on, but I'm excited. Let me know in the chat if you can't hear me. But I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. Today we get to continue our conversation on the resurrection, and I'm pretty excited. But I know we'll give everybody a minute or two to hop on. I'm excited for everybody to hop on because today's going to be good. So if you're in the chat, let me know how you're doing. Let me know what's been up. I haven't been on the channel all week. We had our scribble.io yesterday, though, which was a lot of fun. It was pretty much Pictionary, but on this website, and it was super cool. Some of you guys don't know how to draw. Like, it was so bad. It was like you drew like a bowl of spaghetti, and it was supposed to be like a truck. Like, come on, guys. But man, it was a lot of fun. I know next week we're going to do something similar. Instead of using that website, we're planning to just use Zoom. Keep it easy. We can all hear and talk to each other. So I'm excited for next week to be able to do that with you guys. Yeah, and then we have soap tomorrow with Maya and Sophie in the chapter in Acts again. So it's gonna be super good. So make sure to keep tuning into our channel. Keep up with what's happening in JVOX because just because we can't hang out together in person doesn't mean that we can't do things together online. So if you got ideas of things to do, yo, make sure to send it to us. We wanna know what you guys want to do, whether it's something on Xbox or PlayStation or something on the computer through text, whatever it is. Let us know what you're interested in. Give us some ideas because we'd love to hear them. But yeah, guys. So today we are going to continue our conversation on the resurrection. So last week we talked about how Jesus, how the tomb was really empty. So let me backtrack even further. So last month in June, we talked about how we know that Jesus really died on the cross. This month, we're talking about how do we know that Jesus really rose from the dead. So week 1, which was last week, we talked about how the tomb was definitely empty. We know that if we could see that the tomb is empty, that Jesus showed up and appeared to people, and after his death, and if we know that the disciples were so certain about their belief that they were willing to die for what they believed, those 3 facts together, we can make sure that Jesus definitely did rise from the dead. But last week we did talk about how we know that the tomb was empty. We looked at how all sides of the stories, both believers and unbelievers, all pointed to the same fact that the tomb was definitely empty. Nobody was claiming that there was still a body in the tomb. There was no body in there. But we even see how it tells, the Bible records how women were the first to find the tomb empty. And we talked about how that would have been actually kind of embarrassing for them. It would have been really awkward for them to include that because the word of a woman, the testimony of a woman was not held highly back then. They wouldn't even let them testify in court unless there was no male witnesses there. But the Bible authors are faithful to record the facts, and they choose to report the truth. So, but that's what we talked about. But even with that evidence and some other evidences out there, there's people who try to oppose that view. They try to go against. They come up with these counter explanations. Explanations that are different than what the Bible has to say. And I'm going to share some of them with you this week. There was too many to include last week. So we're going to talk about them this week. And I'm going to show you how those counter explanations don't work. So let's go ahead and hop in, guys. I'm going to share 3 with you. There's a lot more. But I'm going to share some of the 3 biggest ones I want to say. So the idea behind the first one is called the apparent death hypothesis. So the idea behind this is that Jesus was not completely dead on the cross, but that he was taken down. He was just passed out unconscious when they stuck him in the tomb. And when he got in the tomb, he gained consciousness and somehow escaped, convinced his disciples, and rose from the dead. And there are some serious problems with this idea. So I'm going to run you through those. So Last week, well, no, last month we talked about all the different things that Jesus went through, and how he definitely couldn't have survived it, with the whipping, with getting pierced in the side, and all of the other things that we talked about. But even if he was just able to get out of death, just be able to be unconscious, be passed out, he definitely could not have survived in and escaped from the tomb. So he could not have faked his death by escaping from the tomb. He would have had to unwrap himself from the coverings that they put him in. He would have had dislocated shoulders though, so it's like, you got to catch the corners and rip it off. But that just does not work. And he would have been in horrific pain from the crucifixion, like we talked about. Let's say he unwraps himself. Let's say he does that. He still would have had to make it outside of the tomb. But in front of the tomb, there is this giant stone put in place. It would have been about 4.5 feet wide, and it would have been about a foot thick. So if you have a guess of how heavy this big stone would have been, make sure to put in the chat real quick. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. So 4.5 feet. This isn't even. That's like 2 feet. 4.5 feet wide. A little, maybe like down to here on me, but and it would have been, you say 4,000. Okay, so that's a little heavy. But it would have at least been several hundred pounds. So Jesus in his condition, all dislocated shoulders, because of the way he was put on the cross, the scars, the whips all across his back, everything, the holes in his hands and holes in his feet, he would not have been able to move that rock. They actually got multiple people to do it, Roman soldiers, a bunch of them, to move them, because it was heavy. But anyways, even if he moved the stone, I'm saying he didn't, but even if he did, he would have had to either sneak out, which I don't know how you do that if you're throwing a stone. He'd like Hulk over here. But even as a half dead man sneaking around, somebody would have noticed all of that happening. But if the Romans saw him, there's no way he could have fought his way out of there. He's not even fit to move, and he is much less likely to win against a bunch of trained Roman soldiers. But even if he escaped the tomb, even if he did that, he still would have had to walk on his feet that had holes in them, to go to his disciples and convince them that he was the risen Messiah. But this half-dead guy is not going to be able to convince the disciples that he was literally the risen Savior, here to save them. But he would have actually needed some desperate medical attention, and they would have been taking care of him, not Jesus saving them. But so that's the first one. That's the apparent death hypothesis. That's the first one. We'll go ahead and look at the next two real quick. But the next one is called the wrong tomb hypothesis. So to remind you of what the Bible story is, how the Bible records it happening, is that in the Gospels, Jesus is placed in the tomb on a Friday, and on a Sunday, the women go up to the tomb to finish all the burial process, and they actually find the tomb empty. And one of the Gospels records that there was an angel standing there saying that he isn't here, that he has been risen. So the idea behind the wrong tomb hypothesis was that Jesus's tomb was not really empty, that Jesus' followers had checked the wrong tomb. They didn't go to the right one. They went to a different one on accident. That when the women went to finish their burial process on the Sunday morning, they went to the wrong tomb. And then some guy standing there is like, "You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth? Nah, he's not here." And then they in their minds are frightened, and they go tell the disciples, and then they have dreams, hallucinations, like, "Oh my goodness, Jesus rose from the dead." But that idea, that counter explanation, is that it was just a miscommunication. They messed up. They went to the wrong tomb. But again, serious problems with this idea. It doesn't consider that they had already been to the tomb, and they'd already put Jesus there, so likely they would have known their way to that tomb. It doesn't consider that the owner of the tomb, his name was Joseph, he literally could have just been like, nah, that's not my tomb. My tomb's over there. But he could have just pointed to the correct location and shown the place of the dead body, and like, nope, he's not risen. He's right there. But and it ignores the fact that the Bible doesn't say that this guy is just a normal person. He says that he is an angel, and it's not that he says, "Nah, Jesus isn't here." He actually says Jesus isn't here, but he has risen. So they ignore a lot of the details, but pay attention to some of the other ones. So there's some serious problems with this idea. So Spencer, glad you got to join us, man. I know we have a couple people in here today, so if you're here, make sure to say hi in the chat. But for the next one, I'm going to share one more counter explanation. It's called the displaced body hypothesis. I know it sounds long, but it's not that difficult. So the idea behind this is that Jesus was not risen, but that his body was just moved. They just moved his body to a different spot. That this guy Joseph, who owned the tomb, temporarily put Jesus's body in the tomb, but soon after moved Jesus's body to the criminal's graveyard, which is where they've just, after the execution, if nobody's going to bury him, they just put him in that graveyard. And that what happened is that Joseph moved it, and nobody was really told, and that the disciples are like, oh my goodness, he's not in here. Oh, you remember that Jesus said he was going to rise? He's not here, so he must have risen. So that's the idea. But again, serious problems with this idea as well. It doesn't explain why Joseph would have moved the body. You know, as a Jew, he would have followed the Jewish practices, and he would have buried the execution. The custom, the practice was to bury the body the day of their execution, not to like, let's put it here and we can move it later. But and if Joseph really, really wanted to, he could have just put the body in the criminal graveyard just that first day, right when it happened, instead of dirtying his tomb to go put Jesus in there later. But and it actually, again, Jewish laws help us out here. The Jewish law didn't even permit the body to be moved later. It didn't allow them to move it unless you were going to the family's tomb. So it's not like they can move it to this criminal graveyard where they just put the bodies. So yeah, so it's a lot of stuff here. And if Joseph really did move it, he could have been like, disciples, I literally just put him over there. He's not risen. He's right there. So again, serious problems, guys. So we definitely know, between last week's stuff, this week's stuff that I shared with you today, we definitely know that the tomb would have been empty. So we looked, we know the tomb's empty. Over the next 2 weeks, we'll talk about how Jesus really did show up to people after he rose from the dead and showed up to people, and that the disciples were absolutely certain that Jesus really rose from the dead, that they were willing to die for what they believe. So make sure to keep tuning in, because I want you to get the whole picture, so that you can be confident that Jesus rose from the dead. So, but yeah, I'm so glad. I'm gonna take a sip of water because I'm thirsty. But yeah, so let me know what you think in the chat. I do have, unless somebody wants to ask a question real quick, I do have another question that you may have, or some of your friends may have, or even that past JVOXers have asked. So I'll give you a second to do that. But if you don't have a question now, you think of one later, make sure to put it in the chat, text me, post it on the JVOX, DM us, and be able to get that question to us, because we'd love to be able to tackle it. Hey, and if we don't even tackle it in the videos, just make sure to ask one of us. We'd love to find an answer with you. But yeah, so I'm gonna go one more quick question with you guys, and I actually really like this question. It is one that I have heard people talk about, especially unbelievers talk about. So I think as a believer, we want to be ready with a response when they ask it. So let's take a look, JVOX. So the question is, why does God seem so different in the Old Testament, in the New Testament? We look at the Bible, and at first glance, it can be like Old Testament God's mean, New Testament God is like super nice. And so they can look really different. we see in the Old Testament the stories of wars that God had the people fight. We see God pouring out his judgment. We see, like the flood in different scenarios like that. But then in the New Testament, we see Jesus, who is God, who is the Son of God, and he's sitting with children. He's filled with love and showing it to everybody. So you could be so confused at first glance, like how is this the same God that we're looking at? So, is it two different gods? Is God just get really nice when Jesus shows up? So let's kind of take a look at that, JVOX, and maybe it'll help answer your question. But the answer to this, is it two different gods? Did God just get nice? The answer is no. It's the same God with the same characteristics. We see both sides of God throughout the Bible. We see God as both loving and as just, making sure to give consequences when bad things happen. So we see both sides throughout the Bible, not just in the Old Testament, not just in the New Testament, but throughout the whole thing. So when God does bring judgment, when God does show justice or bring punishment, he doesn't do it because it gives him pleasure. He truly wants people to turn away from their sin. He's like a father who, sometimes your parents will give you a punishment because they want you to stop doing that wrong thing. But God's the same way. He actually, he's all good. So he actually really, really wants to do the right thing for you. So he really wants you to turn away from your sin. So he gives you this punishment with hopes that you'll turn away. It talks about in Ezekiel, one of the books in the Old Testament, chapter 18, verse 23, how this is God talking. He says, do you think that I like to see wicked people die? Says the sovereign Lord. Of course not. I want to see them turn away from their wicked ways and live. So this is God talking. He's like, hey, I don't want to see wicked people die. I don't want to have to pour out my judgment on people. I don't want to have to do this stuff, but I need people to turn away from their sins. So, but God is holy, God is just, and he can't allow evil to keep happening without consequences. So, but we often see how God is in the Old Testament is patient. He is extremely caring for his people. Even when his people are complaining and disobedient and ungrateful, we see God continue to show, extreme care and compassion and love over his people, not just in the New Testament, but also in the Old Testament. He says in Exodus 34, verse 6, that I am slow to anger and I am filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. So God is just overflowing with love for his people. So, and often he poured out his judgment so that his people can realize, he punishes them so that they can realize that they've been disobedient and they need to turn away from their sins. And in Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 18, I just want to show you where this is in scripture. It talks about how God would bring judgment because of their sin. It's not like God gives them a punishment for no reason. He gives them a punishment because they have done wrong. And it actually talks about in that verse that God doesn't want to destroy. God doesn't destroy them completely. He punishes them with hopes that they'll turn away. So with all of this, we see that even in the Old Testament, God is overwhelmingly loving and slow to anger. But on the flip side, we see Jesus in the New Testament always sitting with kids. He's super loving, and that's true. But alongside his love and his forgiveness, God here in the New Testament does not allow for sin to go without its consequences, because he is holy, because he is just, same as in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, we see a moment where Jesus is so angry. It's a righteous anger. It's a right anger, where Jesus drives people out of the temple for turning the temple into a marketplace instead of a place for worship. And that is not what God wanted. That was totally wrong. And Jesus responds. And we see in the book of Revelation how one day God's going to come, and confront everybody who chooses to live sinful lives in rebellion against God. And he continually now gives them a chance to turn away from their sin. But there's one day that if they don't choose to turn, God would God would God would have to give a consequence. There would be a punishment for that sin. So, but with all this judgment, with all this justice, he ends up sending Jesus, who pours out his love. That God pours out his love through Jesus. He pays for our sins and offers for all of us to be in a relationship with him. So it's not that there's a different God in the Old Testament or New Testament, or that God just got really nice when Jesus showed up, but we see characteristics about God all throughout the Bible. Sometimes we see a little more in the Old Testament or a little less in the New Testament, but this is the same God acting the same way, who loves his people and wants to see them turn away from sin. And through Jesus being here on earth in that moment, we could just see it really clearly. So JVOX, that's the question. That's the questions I wanted to talk to you guys about today. If you have other questions, make sure to ask. If you have more questions about these questions, make sure to ask. And Ali, I'm so glad you got to hop in here at the end. You can always rewind and watch it later, and for all the people who watch it later in the day, who watch it in the evenings or a year from now, 20 years from now, thanks for tuning in. I'm so glad you got to hear some answers to these questions. So JVOX, thanks for hopping on. I will see you guys later.